Over the last decade, U.S. companies have been hiring folks from overseas more and more, and it's really important when they do so to follow the same level of due diligence as they do on their candidates that are hired here in the United States. My name is Nick Fishman, and today we're going to talk about that topic with our Director of Public Records, Andrew Cashman, and Kelly Lucia, our Director of Client Relations. So, Andrew, we do background checks in over 200 different countries. Where are we getting the information from?
The information can be very different. For example, in some areas, you're going to have a national source where you can go to a country and like the Ministry of Justice and do a search based on the country. In other areas, you're going to be able to, your option is to go to local sources. Sometimes it's both, and you have to balance and figure out which is the best way.
Sure. And Kelly, there are a lot of laws out there. There are a lot of protocols that you need to engage in order to actually conduct that check. Can you talk about a few?
Yeah, I definitely can. It's an Americanized concept for background checks. So when you start to go into other countries, there's going to be different requirements, there's going to be different paperwork, and making sure that your screening company is on top of that is very important. Certain countries might require an original copy that's notarized. There may be additional paperwork that has to be provided. So for the client experience, making sure that that's clear, and then from the applicant experience, you also don't want them to have to continually fill out additional paperwork so that they can comply with a lot of those different laws and regulations that might be out there.
Yeah, let's pick up on that candidate experience. I mean, it's one thing, U.S. applicants are used to the fact that somebody's going to conduct a background check. Now, they might not always be at ease with it, but it's a more U.S. concept. Talk about how applicants perceive background checks in other countries.
For example, if you're doing an education verification in India, many of those schools will require that the applicant provide a copy of their degree because falsification of degrees is so common that those schools won't even look at it until they know they have a legitimate piece of paper. Similar things with having experience letters. You're not maybe just calling the HR department. You're going to be working with a document that's provided to the applicant after they leave the company that's part of the process. So when the applicant maybe who's now living in the U.S. has to dig up that paperwork, it can be difficult. So they may have to have their family get it for them and ship it to them, and it just adds a lot of steps onto it. So preparing them ahead of time so that that paperwork is ready and the background check starts right away instead of getting additional forms is important.
Right, and just culturally, you see a major difference between conducting an employment verification, for instance, in the UK, where it's a much more common practice than you would somewhere in Asia, where perhaps you're lucky just to get a confirmation that the person worked there and maybe what their job title is, and that could be about it. Andrew, there's a big difference between turnaround time from country to country. What do you generally say when it comes to this stuff?
You have to be prepared. As Kelly mentioned earlier, you're going to have a lot more documentation in most cases, where sometimes it's going to be original copies with color and scanned and everything there, and sometimes it's a notarized version that you have to mail from the applicant to the client, to us, to our sources. And this can take time by itself. Just the preparing of that documentation, and then the actual searches can take a long time. And speaking of criminal records internationally, some things, it's evolving. This is something that's a changing atmosphere. Some things are comparable. So you might have a turnaround time of days, but then it can lead to months, up to 6 months we've seen before.
Yeah. So it's really important not only for a background screener to prepare their client for that, but it's important for the employer. If you're dealing with an HR department, the employer should probably be preparing their recruiter that's trying to bring this person in for the fact that that's going to take a while, and the recruiter should also be preparing the candidate that this could take a little while in order to conduct. Is there anything we're missing on this topic that would be important for employers?
You're going to have to do a lot of research to understand it's being done correctly. Like I said, this is something that's evolving. It's not the same in many places. It's almost different in all 200 plus countries. And so you're going to have to make sure you're getting the information correctly, that you're compliant, and it's almost on an individual basis. Some things you can do, data, making sure data is being transferred correctly, is understand safe harbor. So other things, it's just direct attention to the results. into the process in itself. So make sure you're aligning yourself with someone who can explain it to you and something you're comfortable with.
Yeah, and you mentioned an important certification. That Safe Harbor certification is important. Just basically states that you're in line with international protocols on transferring information and such. Kelly, we missing anything else on the topic?
I think the last thing is just being aware as an employer of what you can and can't use. Certain countries, you may not be able to run a credit report. You may not be able to use information outside of that country for certain positions. So be educated yourself and make sure that you're looking to your screening partner to educate you and that you see the sources they're using. Are you comfortable with them? I know that we do a lot of SALT testing, we do a lot of testing of our vendors, but we don't want to make sure that we're relying on a database or anything. You want to make sure you're going right to the correct place that has the information.
Yeah. So the bottom line on international background checks is if you are hiring people from overseas, you don't want to forget to conduct that background check. The due diligence is still important. Companies are obviously still as vulnerable with hiring somebody domestically as they would be overseas, and you don't want to forget that step. That's the final word.